Distinct honor now of introducing a person who has spent his entire life fighting for civil rights and for justice. When he was mayor of Newark, long before criminal justice reform was popular, was bipartisan, had broad mass appeal, Senator Cory Booker was fighting in the streets to push for reform, to push for racial justice, and to make change happen. He has always understood how interconnected our fights are, how interconnected our communities are, and why we have to build coalitions to win. He is a movement builder. And there is no question that he is a moral voice in the Senate. But he's not just a moral voice, he is getting things done. And sometimes he is the face of that work and of that push. But I gotta tell you folks, now as being president and CEO of the Leadership Conference, I see how much Senator Booker does behind the scenes for which he never gets credit. The amount of pushing, the amount of reaching across the aisle to make things happen, to make sure that we can have as meaningful a criminal justice reform bill in Congress that can get passed, pushing, morning, noon, and night. With Thomas Farr, and I already said this morning, there's a lot out there, and we should all thank Senator Scott. But there was a person who was having impassioned conversations with him, showing him the record of what Thomas Farr did in North Carolina. Senator Booker was tireless in seeking the defeat of that vote suppressor. And I think it is incredible to me just how constantly accessible he is to the civil and human rights community. This stuff is in his blood. Senator Booker is a good friend, he is a fearless leader, and he is just plain old fierce. Please welcome Senator Cory Booker.
Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. So I am really just grateful to be here. One of the smartest things I've done this month is to leave my office early and be able to sit over there and listen to Desmond Meade, who just was truly heroically inspiring to me. But that's what we are to each other. Gwendolyn Brooks says we are each other's business. We are each other's harvest. We are each other's magnitude and bond. I was just introduced by someone who has been like that to me. Vanita, who is the president of this conference, has really been someone who has sourced me through her leadership, but more importantly, her friendship. We talk so often about criminal justice issues, human rights issues, on the phone, strategizing, going back and forth, but always she lifts me and elevates me and sort of charges me up and pushes me back into the fight. I have a definition of revolutionary leadership that I lean on that comes from a book called In Search of My Mother's Garden by Alice Walker, where she talks about the true revolutionary. And she says the true revolutionary is always concerned with the least glamorous stuff, the raising of a child's reading level from 3rd grade to 4th, the filling out food stamp forms for folks because people got to eat, revolution or not. The real revolutionary is always close enough to the people to be there for them when they're needed. That's the kind of spirit that Benita has, and the spirit that I know is in this room. I was looking around and seeing a lot of people I recognize from the fight, and I'm just grateful for you. And I want to share with you some of the things on my heart today, as I just came from a meeting with leadership, Schumer and Durbin and others, where we were talking about a criminal justice bill and the possibility of getting something done this Congress. And it really is one of those moments where you're sitting in these gilded rooms with painted ceilings, and you know you just got on a train from Newark, New Jersey, and you hear policy discussions and numbers mentioned and statutes mentioned all in these bills. But as I sit there, I know that those numbers and those legal terms all affect my community. I'm the only United States senator that lives in an inner city, black and brown neighborhood. My community, the median income according to the last census is about $14,000 a year. And that's household income. And I moved in this community back in the 1990s. And back then it was really off the hook, at least that's what I thought. Because when I first moved there, I was moving my stuff into my apartment that I rented, and came back to my car. My stuff was stolen. There was a 24-hour sort of drug trade going on the street, punctuated by shootings I would hear often at night from my bed. And I still remember being overwhelmed by a lot of the challenges on the streets as I was still a law student trying to get immersed in the community. And I'll never forget this woman named Miss Virginia Jones, who became one of my great life heroes. I always say I got my BA from Stanford, but my PhD on the streets of Newark from professors that were far more brilliant, insightful than many of the ones I had in school. And I'll never forget that this woman, one of her first things she did with me was have me stand on the street, and she said, if you want to help me, you got to tell me what you see around you. And I described, I said, what do you want me to do? She goes, describe the neighborhood. So I described the neighborhood. And she just looked angry and upset. This elderly woman, 5 feet and a smidgen tall. She just looked, the more I talked, the more she just looked disappointed and angry with me. And so finally she looks at me when I finish and she goes, you can't help me. And I'm like, what do you mean? And she just turns around and starts walking away. And I run after this woman and I grab her from behind, very respectfully, mind you. And she wheels around and she looks at me and she says, boy, you need to understand something, that the world you see outside of you is a reflection of what you have inside of you. And if you're one of those people who only sees problems and darkness and despair, that's all there's ever going to be. But if you're one of those stubborn people who every time you open your eyes, you see hope, you see love, you see the face of God, then you can be one of those people that helps me. And she walked away. You see, when I'm in my community, we have challenges. Again, I don't know if any other senators had shootings on their block this year. Shahad Smith was murdered at the top of my block this year, a young man that I lived with when I lived in the projects on the top of the hill. I live across the street from a drug treatment center. I sometimes have sat with the men and women in those circles, and I just see beauty, I see divinity, I see God. But I also hear their stories of people who had a disease treated with incarceration after incarceration after incarceration, who've been chewed up by the mechanisms of power, but yet somehow elevate with inspiring grace and dignity. In my community, I go to my bodega and I see people who work full-time jobs using food stamps to still try to get by because we are a society that's stripping the dignity from work. In my community, on 4th of July, I hear parents, talk to me about what it means when some people hear fireworks, but when communities like mine, People have continuing, not post-traumatic stress, but continuing traumatic stress. I live in a neighborhood that's about a mile or so from Superfund sites. Most Americans don't know that Superfund sites are going up, not down in America, because now we have this sort of Grover Norquist, no new taxes. Reagan and Mitch McConnell back years ago authorized a small tax on the most polluting industries to clean up Superfund sites, but they didn't reauthorize it in this day and age. So Superfund sites are festering and growing, toxic environments are growing. We now know that children born within a mile or two of Superfund sites have 20% higher rates of birth defects, autism. Communities like mine are communities where people realize that some folk have an easier time finding unleaded gasoline than unleaded water. People think Flint, Michigan is an anomaly. There's over 1,000 jurisdictions in America where children have twice the blood lead levels in Flint, Michigan. Can't plant in the soil in my neighborhood. We have a big urban garden. We had to put planter boxes down because you plant in that soil, and the plants are toxic because of the lead. I come to Washington from Newark, from a community which I have lived now for 2 decades. Policies down here matter. I see that the bigotry and the racist policies of decades ago, housing policies that redlined neighborhoods, did FHA loans, and created walled-in ghettos. Literally, my family, when we moved to New Jersey, had to get a white couple to pose as us to buy the home I grew up in because they were steering black families away. And so when you have communities in which the air is toxic, the soil is toxic, the water is toxic, in which violence and gunshots give people traumatic stress, where you have shrines on street corners often. And I'm not saying, look, my mayor is an amazing man. He is driving down the violent crime rate, but you still see those shrines of teddy bears and candles on streets where you have a criminal justice system that is dramatically different in this country, depending on the geography in which you live. There's no difference between blacks and whites for using drugs or selling drugs. But if you are African American, you're almost 4 times more likely to be arrested for those things. You get more likely to get convicted, more likely to get the mandatory minimum. Where we have a country, as Brian Stevenson says, that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than poor and innocent. The community I grew up in another part of New Jersey, my friends did so many things wrong. This is what Brother Mead was talking about room to fail. Children will fail. From the time they start walking, they will stumble and fall. And in my community I grew up in, a predominantly white community, kids used drugs, experimented with drugs. Kids did crimes. On senior cut day, some of my friends went in to buy alcohol with fake IDs. The place was closed. They kicked in the door, stole cases of beer. That is a felony. They got caught. And what happened? The right thing happened. No charges, no nothing. The right thing happened. Kids in my community in Newark have no margin for those errors. They get chewed into the systems. As we sit here now, there are thousands of children sitting in jails for weeks, if not months, who have yet to even have a trial. And they're sitting in environments that other countries call torture. That's solitary confinement. There has been a national culling in communities like mine, a culling of human beings' potential by pulling more and more people, the most marginalized folks in our community, people who are low income, people who are mentally ill, people who are addicted to drugs, black and brown people. And do not forget the pipeline we have in this country from sexual assault to our prisons. 86% of women in America, in our American prisons, are survivors of sexual assault. And when I come down here to Washington, my community is a part of me now. The debates over these issues, these bills, to me, I see real people in my mind. I know folk in communities. I know that these aren't data points, but human dignity. And what bothers me now is people do not realize that human dignity is indivisible. You cannot assault the human dignity of one American without assaulting the human dignity of all Americans. And now we have this toxic illusion of separateness to somehow believe that we could have this system of oppression in our country, this cancer on the soul of our country that affects only one part of our body, but is not an urgency and a crisis for the whole body politic. People have no idea what we have done to ourselves, a self-inflicted wound. I see it in my community because of the economic injustice that stems from a system of environmental injustice, of criminal injustice. You see, you have one criminal conviction for a nonviolent drug. Kids in my neighborhood who were arrested for doing things that 2 of the last 3 presidents have done. Sitting there watching yesterday as President Bush was laid in state, and you see people that you know have done the kind of things that kids do, but some folk, their pathways to the presidency, and some folks, the pathway is well-worn to prison. And then when they come out, they are still imprisoned by 40,000 collateral consequences for having that charge that devastate your economic potential. Devastate your economic. You can't get a job at a fast food restaurant in Newark. You can't get taxi licenses, business licenses, loans from banks. Can't get Pell Grants when you come out, and we stripped it away from folk that are in. Part of the best taxpayer dollar you can use is to give people access to education when they're incarcerated, because of it lowering recidivism rates. We do these self-inflicted wounds that make no economic sense as well as making no moral sense. And then what does it do? It creates poverty at epidemic levels. A study came out of a great college here in the United States that says we'd have 20% less poverty overall in America if our incarceration rates were the same as our industrial peers. And so I sit here today, I have to say, hurting. And let's not forget, I mean, we are a country that's hurting. You may not know it. We all have heard stories about people walking around feeling 100%, not realizing that cancer is eating away at their insides. There is a brokenness in America. That we profess these values, we stand and salute a flag, and we pledge an oath to the ideal of liberty and justice for all, but that is not the truth. That is an aspirational view for our country. We still have work to do, like every generation before us has had work to do. And I tell you, I feel the hurt. People walk around and we should be kinder and gentler. We should extend more grace because there is pain in this country, unspoken pain, unspoken struggles. And in communities like mine, it's more exposed to the surface. More people see what's going on. You see folks that have their stuff put outside on the street because $400 or $500 in arrears. In a rental system that is geared against so many low-income people who work full-time jobs and play by the rules. You see the brokenness before you. And that's what I love about my community, because there is such grace and understanding and compassion and empathy, like Miss Virginia Jones, it says, look at that person. Don't look down at the person. See the divinity and the dignity that they possess. See the connection that your spirit and soul has. See how your very attitude when you encounter them creates the environment either to continue that injustice or to address that injustice. And so I'm here with a community of folks to let folks know why we fight. And that we have to stay connected, as I said about revolutionaries, and Benita, we've got to stay connected to the soul of our country. We've got to be sourced by the people we live for. We've got to elevate the ideals of this nation so that when we say indivisible, that has meaning, a spiritual meaning to it. When we say united, that has a spiritual meaning to it. When we swear to justice, that is a call to the conscience of our country. We have got to continue to make folk uncomfortable. Because we have grown far too comfortable with injustice. I've been reading a lot of King recently. There's a great book I recommend of his writings called The Radical King. If you finish that one, I picked up another one talking about King and labor, his talk about economic justice, because there's so much about, folk forget about the civil rights. The March on Washington was about jobs and justice. People forget about this. What's the sense, as one of our leaders said, of being able to sit at a lunch counter if you can't afford to buy anything on the menu? Why do my friend Natasha, who works at the IHOP, still need food stamps to feed her family? As folk outsource the cost of their corporations onto taxpayers and onto the burdens in the backs of folk. I was amazed that King would end so many of his speeches with the rift that is the title of our conference. I thought it was just one speech he gave after getting across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. After they had been driven back, when he finally got there, he gave that ending. How long? Not long, because truth crushed to the earth will rise again. How long? Not long, because no lie can live forever. How long? Not long, because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But I started seeing through these labor speeches that he was saying that over and over again. These were the great days back before YouTube, when people who have to speak a lot like me could use the same riffs over and over again. But that was me, that small me was looking at that part, but the larger me was looking at what King was trying to do there. He was trying to do something Miss Virginia Jones would do to me, and I'll quote her words in a moment, but he was trying to get people to focus in on the very difficult challenge of having hope, the very difficult challenge of being faithful, because it is hard to stay faithful and stay hopeful when the wretchedness of humanity, the unfairness, the injustice, when it's so hard. 5 years I've worked to get something done on criminal justice reform. This bill that we have right now is but a step in the right direction on a mile-long journey. It is not a perfect bill, but dear God, after decades of mandatory minimums, 3 strikes, you're out. It's the first time it stops and starts to move in the right direction. But God bless America, 5 years. And we get one solid step, and there's no guarantee this bill will get to a 4 for a vote. The clock is ticking, 2 weeks left. How do you stay faithful? How do you keep hope? And King, at the end of his speeches, was trying to remind people the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Don't forget, slavery came to this country in the 1600s, and it wasn't until the 1800s that abolitionists won. Don't forget that the subjugation of people of this country was generations of subjugation, and it took years to get to the civil rights movement. Don't forget that women were second-class citizens from the beginning of this nation, and it took generations to get to suffrage. Miss Jones taught me what hope and faith are. Her son was murdered in the lobby of the building I would move into. Back in the 80s, I moved into those projects in the late 90s. Her son was murdered in that lobby, and she never left those buildings. Talk about pain and wretchedness, the funk of life. And she never left. She and I made enough money, we could have lived in other places. But she stayed in those buildings. I asked her why once, with that kind of hurt, unimaginable grief. Why would she stay in those buildings? And she said to me, boy, why am I still, yes, Miss Jones, why do I still live in apartment 5A? That's what I asked, Mr. Why am I still the tenant president of these buildings since the day they were built? Yes, Miss Jones, why? She goes, because I'm in charge of Homeland Security. You have a choice every moment of your life to accept things as they are or take responsibility for changing them. We have agency in this room. We have power in this room. Alice Walker said the most common way people give up their power is not realizing they have it in the first place. Ms. Jones taught me that hope, don't sit around here waiting for hope. That's what King was trying to say. Don't wait on hope. Hope is not passive. It doesn't wait for a sign, a light at the end of a tunnel. Hope is the active conviction that despair will not have the last word. And what King is talking about the arc of the moral universe, is what Baldwin wrote about in the last pages of The Fire Next Time. He says, I know what I'm asking you is impossible, but today's day and age is an every day and age. The impossible is the least we can demand. For one is, after all, emboldened by the spectacle of human history in general and American Negro history in particular, for it is nothing less than the perpetual testimony of the achievement of the impossible. Yes, the arc of the moral universe is long. And yes, it bends towards justice, but it bends because we have bent it. And this is the call right now about who we will be in this moment. I tell you, this country, let's not whitewash our history. It was born with imperfect geniuses who put on paper a break with the course of human events. This country would not be a theocracy where we all pray alike. It would not be based on some kind of tribalism or some kind of religion. Spin the globe and you'll see the borders of so many countries are born from that. Countries split apart, Pakistan and India, because of religious differences. No, they said that we will be a nation based upon principles and ideals that are even bigger than the men that put them down. And they couldn't escape the bigotry and the hatred of this time. The Declaration of Independence, let's not get it twisted. Let's tell the truth about America. The Declaration of Independence calls Native Americans savages. Women are not even mentioned at all. Blacks are fractions of human beings. Y'all know Stokely Carmichael used to say, constitute. I could only say 3/5 of the word. But the story and the greatness of America isn't the absence, don't whitewash it, out of our history of bigotry and hatred. The greatness of this country is generations of folk said, I'm going to bend the arc of this nation's history towards justice, and they fought. And many of them would never live to see the victories that they fought. They would never live to see the sprouts of the seeds they planted through their struggles, but they fought nonetheless. And don't get it twisted. It wasn't senators that made this change. You all know it wasn't a bunch of men that came to the Senate floor and said, you know what, it's time that women have the right to vote. It wasn't a senator named Strom Thurmond who came out and said, yes, it's time those Negro people have some civil rights. No, it was coalitions that looked a lot like the people in this room. Black folks, brown folks, white folks, Christians, Jews, Muslims, Indians, Sikhs, Hindu, everybody marching together, fighting together, coming together, pushing together, meeting in less fancy places than this. Come on now. I can't imagine in August sitting in a church basement plotting the revolution. I can't imagine in a barn hiding out black folk and white folk, Quakers and former slaves, planning the biggest infrastructure project this nation has ever seen, the Underground Railroad. I can't imagine what it was like for those folks at Seneca Falls or those folks at Stonewall who were planning and plotting and fighting at times for liberation, for justice, to awaken people about their indivisibility. That the trans destiny and the Baha'i destiny and the Muslim destiny and the Lutheran destiny and the libertarian destiny and the vegetarian destiny, whatever American you are, we are interwoven. We need each other. We got to love each other. Don't let people make the aspiration of this country be tolerance. Go home tonight and tell somebody you're living with, I tolerate you, baby. No, we are called for love. Love says, I see you, I see your worth, I see your dignity, I see how my destiny is interwoven with yours. Get up, We need each other. We got to love on each other. Now, y'all applaud. Let me tell you right now, got to love Republicans. It might not be, I'm trying to make y'all uncomfortable. Lindsey Graham, Kavanaugh hearing. I am a little upset. I don't know if y'all noticed, I used to have like a Questlove afro, but I pulled it all out after that. Unconditional love. I can hate the sins, but I'm not going to hate a person, the sinner. I'm not going to hate you because I have sinned. I've made mistakes. I've slipped into the wretchedness. Just days later, I'm on the phone with Lindsey Graham, double team in the White House about getting an effective ban on juvenile solitary confinement into the bill. It's in the bill now. Unconditional love. So let me end with that. Because as much as we want to point fingers and make it about other people, it's always going to come down to us. That's why I walked in this room. I wanted to get here early. I scrambled to get here early because I need you all. Because the essence of who I am is always going to be that young guy, law student, moving into a community of folks and the funk of that community, in the challenges of that community, and finding home and fellowship like I had never experienced in my life. Finding people that embraced me despite myself. Miss Jones may have left me on that street after preaching to me about what I see, but she didn't give up on me. I made mistakes. I'm proud of my record as mayor, but I made mistakes. And the forgiveness I found, the grace that I found, I now realize that America, we need a revival of civic grace where we embrace each other again and revive that love, that spirit of commitment to one another written into that imperfectly perfect document, the Declaration of Independence, that ends with a declaration of interdependence. We must mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. God, we need that sacred honor. But it all comes back to me. It all comes back to you. And I'll end with my imperfections. I lived in these projects. I told you it was tough living. Roaches, mice. I could heat and hot water intermittent, but it was community. It was what King called for, the beloved community. I found it in the projects in Newark. Folk who looked out for each other and cared about each other. I would come home at night from hard, long days and, just hang out in my lobby. Kids hung out in my lobby. I watched them grow up. They were teenagers now. They hung out. There was a crew in my lobby. The Hassan Washington was the head of the crew, and I used to look at him and I go, oh my God, I have come my whole life and I have found my father again. Because my dad grew up in the mountains of North Carolina to a single mom, lived with his grandmother for a while. Hassan was living with his grandmother 4 floors below me, and the two of them had the same wicked sense of humor, the same charm, natural leadership gifts. And my father, because of the grace and kindness of people that would not let that child fail, came out of depths of poverty, going back to slavery, on to college from a church collection to get him enrolled at a HBCU called North Carolina Central. His civil rights movement happened while he was there. His story is a story about the conspiracy of love, about Americans being there, fighting the big battles, but never forgetting about that child. Well, I walked into this lobby, the crew, Hassan and his folks, and I saw them trying to hide it. I walk in, and I smell marijuana. Not quite as pungent as I had smelled it back in my Stanford days, but come on now. If they were stopping and frisking college students, I won't say half, but a lot of our American college students would be in jail. But they don't do that. But I knew these kids didn't have, Brother Meade said, that margin for error. So alarm bells went off. And I started saying, I got to step up my activism. Brought them out to the movies. I let them choose the movie. Mistake. Don't go see Saw 2. Why would they make a second one? took them out and started saying to them, I'm going to hook you each up with mentors and da-da-da. But I got busy. Why did I get busy? Because I was running for mayor. And the big goal I was thinking about, the big office. And so I didn't follow through on the things I said I was going to do with them, but I would still come home into that lobby during the campaign, and they would cheer me on. I'd walk through these kids, and I tell you, it was amazing. They would greet me chanting the name and the title I thought, Mayor Booker, Mayor Booker. They had lawn signs, waving them around. I got in that elevator so happy till I realized, where did they get those lawn signs from? They're expensive. If anybody's run campaigns, they're expensive. I won the election. I had death threats against me. FBI warned us, so they put police all over the place. There were police stationed in the projects, in the lobby outside, the safest they'd ever been. But the kids, I don't care who you are. When you were a high school student, you didn't want to hang out where there were police, so I didn't see this crew, but I was on the mission. I was going to make Newark better for everybody. The early days, there was lots of shootings going on in Newark. It was the heat of the summer, and I used to run to the street corners where shootings happened and give street-level sermons, talking to people about the plans, about us coming together. One day, about a month after I'd been elected, I come to a street, Court Street, near Broad Street, body being covered, another one being put in the ambulance, one dead, and I barely affirmed the humanity sprawled out before me. I turned to minister to the living. That day I got home to try to steal a couple hours of sleep, sat on my bed at the top of those projects, looked at my BlackBerry, and there was a name, Hassan Washington. I broke. His funeral, everybody was there. It was at Perry's funeral home in the basement. They had one room in the basement, and everybody showed up. And I walked down those staircases. It was a narrow staircase. I used to dislike that room and the unnatural aberration of children being buried by parents. And I walked down those narrow staircases like descending into a bowel of a ship, and there we were, chained together in grief, piled in one on top of the other, swaying and moaning and crying. I was a newly elected mayor, but I didn't feel powerful. I felt impotent. I stood in the back. I couldn't minister to anybody. I was hurting, leaning on others, and finally I couldn't take it. I just ran out. I ran out. Jumped in a new SUV down to City Hall, into my office, slamming the door, sat on my couch in that office, and for the first time as mayor of the city of Newark, I wept and I wept and I wept. God put Hassan right below me. He put him right in front of me. He was my father. Generations ago in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, they didn't fail my dad. When his grandmama couldn't take care of him, people took him into their own home. This was my spiritual moment where I could return the favors, the blessings of my ancestors by paying it for him. He was right in front of me on my doorstep. We quote statistics all the time, but these are lives. This is our nation's greatest natural resource, the genius of our children. And Hassan was a future leader, a future Rhodes Scholar. He was a future senator, future president. And he is gone, and nothing I can do can resurrect that. And all of us came to his funeral. All of us were there for his death, but where were we for his life? And so now I say to everyone here, I don't need to preach to you all about the pain in our communities, about the hurt, about the grievous losses of our national treasure, about how every day that goes by that we don't move Washington, move our state houses every single day, that we tolerate the unimaginable, like more African Americans under criminal supervision than all the slaves in 1850, the unimaginable. That 1 out of every 3 incarcerated women on the planet Earth are here in America. Unimaginable. That our children are being poisoned every single day because we won't put a few dollars into a budget, a rounding error to do water infrastructure in this country. Unimaginable. I don't need to tell you all about the human carnage that we're tolerating in our country. where boys in boxes are commonplace, so commonplace that we doesn't even make the news anymore. But I end with Mrs. Jones's words to me. Words I repeated to myself on that couch, weeping into my hands. Words I've repeated on day after day in the Senate, where I bang my head against the wall of what seems to be implacable resistance. Yes, I repeat the words of King. How long, not long. Yes, I repeat the words of Douglas. Power concedes nothing without a demand. Yes, I repeat the words of our leaders who, even though they were sick and tired of being sick and tired, still fought. But let me give you the final words of a woman who lived on the 5th floor of the projects. Years before I would be mayor of the city, after another kid was shot and killed in our neighborhood, I tried to stop this kid's bleeding, but to no avail. I was shaken and traumatized. First time I'd ever been with a body as it slipped out of its mortal coil. She saw me that next morning, broken and feeling like I was drowning, filling with darkness in my soul, angry at our nation. And I'm telling you right now, if our country hasn't broken your heart, you don't love her enough. She saw me there broken. She saw me there hurting. She saw my soul screaming out. Across the courtyard in the Newark projects, she didn't say anything. She just opened her arms. And that early morning, as the sun had just risen, I ran across that courtyard and hugged this elderly woman and just started crying into her shoulder. And she just said 2 words as she rubbed my back and held me tight. This warrior of a woman, this soldier of love, held me. Her son murdered in a lobby 50 feet away. She held me, comforted me with 2 words, inspired me with 2 words, gave me the gift of these 2 words. She rubbed my back and just said over and over again, stay faithful, stay faithful, stay faithful. My fellow Americans, we have come this far by faith. The faith of ancestors who never gave up, the faith of blacks and whites and Christians and Jews like Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner who died for voting rights, a battle we still fight today. Stay faithful and know that faith without works is dead. We have work to do. We have battles to fight. Our country still calls. The dream still demands. America is in the balance. And I'm telling you right now, if we fight together and work together and sacrifice together, we will stand on a mighty day on a mountaintop and say that finally we've come to a point in this country where the past has been paid back by our gifts to the future, that this will be one day the United States of America, and justice will roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. Thank you, everyone. Stay faithful.
There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Because guess what? We come back live January 3rd. The blackest show on all of digital, cable, and broadcast. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Hello. Y'all want some of this? /Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications. There's only one show out here, folks, in the digital world that's focused on you. Because here's the piece. I ain't afraid of Fox News. Come back live January 3rd. All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. Now, a word from one of our Roland Martin Unfiltered partners. You've heard me say it before, and I will say it again. Write down this website, marijuanastock.org. That's marijuanastock.org. I'm going to tell you why it matters. Legal marijuana has grown to become a $9 billion industry in roughly 6 years. Forbes magazine predicts the market will continue to grow to nearly $50 billion in the next 10 years. So whether you like it or not, legal marijuana is a growing industry, and it is only going to get bigger. Now, if you're an investor, you get it. You look for business models that are easy to understand in industries that are trending up. Our friends at Transatlantic Real Estate made their business very simple. They buy land that supports legal marijuana operations and lease it to high-paying tenants. So you are investing in the landlord of a licensed marijuana farm. Stop working so hard for your money. Let your money start working for you by investing in the legal cannabis industry. You can invest as little as $300 up to $10,000. But you can't wait. This crowdfunding opportunity is only available for a few more days. They say that you either make things happen, watch things happen, or sit around wondering what happened. Don't be the person watching and wondering. Don't let another investment boom get away from you. It's time to make something happen for you, your finances, and your family. And don't forget my pro tip. To be included, you must complete and confirm your application. And be sure to complete the process. Go to marijuanastock.org. That's marijuanastock.org. Get in the game, folks. Do it now before time runs out. Now back to your Roland Martin Unfiltered video. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com.